it is hot. Despite a slow start to my reading, we did end up picking a bunch of bangers up. Just gonna dive right into this. The first book we read is Elena Knows by Claudia Piniero. This is translated from Spanish by Francis Riddle. This is a story about a mother-daughter dynamic, a very complex mother-daughter dynamic. So essentially we have Elena and we have Rita. Rita has been found dead in a belfry. She was found hanging. Elena is like, well, Rita would never do something like that, so obviously she did not unalive herself. It was a murder. And so the book is about this mother looking for answers as to what happened with her daughter. Elena is a woman who has Parkinson's, so you're constantly feeling this battle between her and her body, and she's moving through the city trying to get answers as to what may have happened to her daughter. As she's moving through the city, there are like flashbacks to the past where she is looking back at these memories with her daughter, and in these flashbacks you see the tendons of their relationship, and is a ugly, combative, complex mother-daughter relationship, which is my catnip. I kept saying, like, if you like Elena Ferrante, the very naked, taboo view of motherhood from a person who might be ambivalent about it, or who's questioning it, or is a little critical of it, but want to see it from the perspective of a mother-daughter relationship, pick this book up. This book really like occupied the body. It was looking at bodily autonomy, it was looking at identity, the betrayal between oneself and one's body, what is agency, how do you assert that agency. It was also looking at our roles, and I guess that sort of relates to identity, but once your role has been stripped away, what do you make of yourself? Who is left? There was this really like frantic search for identity and form in this book, which was a ride to experience. And then just like the fleshy realities of this relationship filled with so much tension, especially in this mother-daughter relationship where the daughter has become the caretaker for the mother, and so there is fidelity and there is a sense of servitude in their relationship, but you also see the animosity that grows out of that. There's one scene, and this was right in the beginning, and this was where I was like, oh, I see where we're going with this. But because of Elena's condition, she can't really bend down to do things like cut her nails, so her daughter does that for her. And Rita cut her toenails, and then she went to go wash her hands, and she washed her hands fastidiously and went to go like wash her hands with bleach. That just so well illustrated, I don't know if it was repulsion, but there was definitely an attempt on Rita's part to distance herself from her mother. And as the book continues, you sort of see ritualized arguments, how snarky they can be with each other. You kind of just saw how infuriated Rita was with the situation, and I think Elena tried to always soften it with a bit of humor, but there was always this real sense of anger in Rita. And you kind of just see different scenarios and situations that have arisen with these women and other people, and it was a good book. I've seen this categorized as a crime book or a thriller book, and I kind of really disagree with that. I think it was very character driven and very literary, and had a lot to say about the relationships that we have to people, what we owe to people, the roles that we inhabit. Again, how do you assert agency in those roles? It was just a really fantastic book, really interestingly written as well. I think that being in Elena's voice, there seems to be this attempt at propulsion, but also this like constantly getting pulled back, which I think really embodies her physical condition. It was just like, overall, it was such a cool book. So I immediately went to go borrow A Little Luck, which I have over here, and I'm really excited to read more Claudia Piniero. I feel like, I don't know why I didn't read her before. I don't know if it's because I heard that it was a crime book and I was like, I'm not interested in that. Yeah, if you like Elena Ferrante and delving into like the ugliest bits of relational dynamics, this is your book. I really, really like this one. The next book I read was The Guest by Emma Cline. I listened to this one on audio, and yeah, it was a fun book to listen to while I was doing my dishes and cleaning my apartment. It was really compelling and interesting. So the premise of this one is this young 22-year-old girl named Alex sleeps with older men, and then she just like constantly is self-sabotaging herself. So this one guy, Dom, she like steals his money, and then all of a sudden she's on the run from this guy because it isn't the consequences of her own actions. The man is like, you can't do this, and so he's like looking for his money. He's looking for her. And we see her try to like fold into relationships with other older men in order to protect herself or to feign some normalcy. She does eventually find some normalcy and protection with this one dude, Simon, but then she sabotages that. And so we see her on the run. Stakes are raised, tensions are built. It was a fun time. I think I really liked the narrator's voice in this one, and I think that's what really kept me going, because even at the end, okay, so the ending of this book, if you've read, I like want to talk about it because I don't know what to make of it. And I think that was really interesting, but I don't know if it was interesting just to be interesting or if it was actually interesting. I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah, it kind of left off in a very like, not a cliffhanger, but it was just like super ambiguous. Like you didn't know what to believe, and you know, you're with Alex the entire time and you watch her constantly like self-sabotage, and then the unreliable narrator-ness of Alex is sort of turned onto your relationship with the character, and I think that was really cool. But I want answers. Like I need to know what happened. Did she walk into this party with like blood dripping down her head? I don't know. I want answers. Finished it and I was like, oh, that's really interesting, and I had a lot to think about towards the end of it, and like I was never bored in the middle of it, but like as a whole thing, I don't know that I got anything out of it. It was a book that was read. Yeah. The next book I read was Houseguest by Amparo Davila. Perdón, Davila Amparo. What's the lady's name? Davila Amparo, creo yo. Vamos a ver. By Amparo Davila. So the next book that I read was The Houseguest and Other Stories by Amparo Davila, and this was translated by Matthew Gleason. And okay, so this, I think I went into, so I buddy read this one with Kat from Lit with Kat, and I think she had a lot of expectations about how scary this was going to be. And I think I had maybe some expectations because she had expectations, but I really didn't know much about this short story collection other than it was like eerie. This was a very eerie, bizarro collection of stories about these like creatures. Every story had a creature that was never really fully illustrated, but had full reign on the characters in the story. It was always like this creature in the periphery, this very amorphous thing that sort of hung out in the margins but terrorized the out of everyone. That was kind of the vibe throughout the stories. As we were reading, we were saying, is this commentary on the patriarchy or like on machismo? Because it felt like there was this menacing and domineering unspoken thing that was puppeteering and dictating the lives of everyone in the stories. Stories were kind of about how they navigated that, how they found freedom from it, whether that is through the death of the thing or through escaping the thing or through death themselves. So it was a really compelling collection of stories, and I think this one really folded into the narrative of the unusual. One of my first videos that I made on this channel was about Latin American short stories and the narrative of the unusual. Don't go back to watch it. But I was just reading a bunch of short story collections and was really digging that tradition. Like I really like things that are eerie, that are sort of like covert and not stated and hold the text and create tension but is never named. Like I like that kind of thing. So this I think totally folded into that. But I think that the stories, and this was written a long time ago, so I would say that she's maybe like a trailblazer in that. Let me not say that. I don't know if she's a trailblazer in that tradition. But it did feel like at some point it got a little bit repetitive. I remember towards the end there were like 2 or 3 stories that deviated from in her own collection trope of like the evil in the shadows, the evil in the margins kind of thing, where she was talking about our fears and how our fears can become those evil things, those menacing, unspoken little monsters that dictate our lives. I think the beginning was strong and the ending was strong. The middle was a little bit you know, and that's okay. That's totally fine. I enjoyed it, and it really got me wanting to read more short stories from Latin America. And I think Kat and I were speaking about maybe reading Mariana Enriquez, who I have not read. I am kind of scared of her because I do think that she bends more towards horror, and I'm still a pendeja. I can't really hang. So I can do eerie, but I can't do scary. So we'll see with that. I'm working on perfecting my matcha. Kat has been helping me because I've been spending like, so long story short, my shoulders are injured, so I have been a PT kid since I've been back in the States. Every time I go to PT, it's on the Upper West Side, so I'll go to PT, then I'll go get a matcha latte, and I'll walk over to Central Park and do a little bit of reading there, and it's actually been quite delightful. A very nice silver lining to having both of my shoulders out of commission. It's been nice, but I also don't want to be spending that much money, so I've been trying to perfect my matcha latte, and I think I've kind of gotten it. I'm happy right now. This is not a short story collection, but this is an essay collection by a Mexican writer. Planes Flying Over a Monster. This is Daniel Saña Paris. It was translated by Christina McSweeney and Philip K. Zimmerman. I feel like Zimmerman no, that's a lie. But I really like the books that Christina McSweeney translates. This was an essay collection that I really enjoyed. So this one was sent over to me by Catapult. It just came out. This one has been blurbed by Guadalupe Nettel. It's been blurbed by Leslie Jameson, so a lot of cool people backing this one up. This is about Daniel moving through different cities. So he spends some time in Montreal, Mexico City, Havana, and other places. He explores things like pleasure, pain, what it is to be an artist, what it means to be a writer, what influence means, what autonomy means, what authenticity means. This was a really fascinating one. My favorites were definitely when he was in warmer climates, which was really interesting. I really liked how he spoke about whether or not you can even write in places like Mexico City. There was one line about pain here and how difficult it is to convey pain. Like, no one is going to understand your pain, and so you even try to express it, which I thought was a really interesting thought. He also talks like the last essays about how he was in a cult when he was younger, and that like threw me off. It was also really compelling. So yeah, I really enjoyed this essay collection. Would really highly recommend it. I jotted down a ton. Beautiful, sharp pieces of writing. I decided to return to Mexico for good with no intention of visiting Spain, preferably ever again. His descriptions of these cities, especially, I really loved how he described Havana and Ciudad de Mexico. I really enjoyed this one. This was one that I was so excited to continue picking up. If you want to read about being in different cities and moving through those cities and finding yourself, I would recommend this one. In the same vein, I also listened to I'm Mostly Here to Enjoy Myself by Glynnis MacNicol. This was about a 40-year-old woman who fled to Paris in order to like get laid. And I listened to this one while I was moving through Ireland, so it was nice to listen to a woman who was traveling while also traveling. And this one is all about like pursuing carnal pleasures and like her on dating apps and her being in a relationship with all of these men, what it means to have been divorced from physical touch at the tail end of the pandemic and to return to that touch, to seek it in a way without strings and to seek it for the sake of seeking it. It was really interesting. I think I shouldn't compare them because they were very different collections, but like I liked the cerebral quality of Daniel's exploration through these different cities, whereas like Glynnis's book was very frivolous. But I think they were also looking for different things. Like I think Daniel was really looking for a search for authenticity and identity throughout these different cities and sort of who he became in these cities and how to sort of find the center of himself in order to like be true to his writing, whereas Glynnis was just trying to get fucked. I enjoyed it. It was like a fun time to listen to while you're traveling. There were two things though. Like I am really trying to step into the mindset that a book doesn't have to be successful from the beginning to the end in order for it to be a success for me. Like I think that if a book leaves something, that's a successful book to me. In Glynnis's book, there were two parts that really stuck with me that I still think about. There was one essay or bit of it where she was talking about how she explores cities through biking and how your relationship to a city when you're a woman biking gets you to a level of that city that is very particular. And as someone who is an aspiring biker but who lives in New York City and is absolutely terrified of how people drive here, as a driver myself, I feel like I know the full breadth of how people move in their cars and I just like don't want to get hit. So for me, it's like I always want to explore the city on my bike and I'm always scared to, but I feel like because I haven't built that muscle to get on a bike and explore places, it doesn't occur to me to do it in other cities. But I love how she spoke about the capillaries of a city explored through biking and how completely dissimilar those are to moving around via a vehicle or moving around on foot. You see a different angle of a city when you're moving through biking, and it just really inspired me to like get on my bike more. The final essay she was speaking about, and there was like in the middle she was talking about the growing comfort with her body, which was also like very cool, but towards the end she was also talking about how stories are formulated and the sort of structures that our stories embody and how a lot of our stories take on the structure of a male orgasm, which I thought was fascinating in terms of just like starting point, climax, denouement, and how that's kind of mimicking the excitement pattern of a man, as opposed to if we were to model our stories on the female orgasm, it would just happen in waves and waves. And I thought like this stunned me and impacted me and like really wowed me. And I was holding on to this because also when I was in Ireland, I went to a literary festival. So I sat for a conversation between Ronan Hessian and Caleb Azuma Nelson, and they were talking about structures of novels and how stories are told. And something that Ronan said as well was that we are pretty compliant to Western ways of structure where, you know, we're starting somewhere, we're rising to something, and then we're having sort of like a resolution. Whereas in Eastern stories, he was saying that the first line is as important as the middle, is as important as the last. There's no hierarchy in the story and how things are told. Everything is sort of like a wave. Everything is sort of cyclical in that way, which is why these books tend to be a bit more balanced in their storytelling. It's not so much of the rising action and the climax and all of this. Every part of the story is significant and so it feels more balanced throughout. And I was just holding these two and I thought it was really fascinating to think about how stories are structured and formed and how we do really subscribe to one type of narrative formatting and how there is a possibility for different kinds of storytelling. And I think even like when I think about my brain, I have a really hard time seeing like big picture stuff. I instead focus on the details, and so like for me, each little like sentence feels like its own novel. That sort of writing where things happen in waves or things are not sort of like structured in this type of hierarchy make more sense for my brain. So it was just, it like prompted a whole existential crisis about like how I read. Not existential, because it was actually quite delightful to read like, oh, this is also why I like the books that I like and why my brain wedging itself into details, and like each detail feels really expansive to me. And that's not how everyone reads, which is fine, but it's nice to be able to like identify that about myself. So anyway, for that reason, I really enjoyed that book because it made me come to that realization, helped me connect that part of myself. Then I did read 3 Sally Rooney books. I'll do it really briefly because I actually just, I think in one of the videos that I did. I'm talking really fast. Okay. So I read Intermezzo. That is my favorite Sally Rooney book to date. This is a book about these two brothers. I was gonna say Isaac. Ivan and Peter. They are dealing with the death of their father. So it's a book on grief. I don't think it's about like explicitly the loss of someone, but I think what Rooney was exploring in this one is what happens when our adherence to conforming to a norm, to an expectation or a script eclipses our own desires, and what are the sort of deaths that are experienced in that. How do we end up in despair? What are the conditions that help those dark spaces flourish, and how do we sort of get out of those? You know, at the center of this, or at the core of this, there's also the question of like these age gap relationships, their rightness in society, but then we're also looking at what is rightness. I will say this is the most dense Rooney book. It's a book that I fled to the woods to read. It takes a little bit to get into it, but once you find your footing, it sweeps you up in it. I distinctly remembered, especially the ending. The ending is so heartbreaking. Not that anything happens, but just I think that she really gets to the nut of despair. The way that she's depicting this and the way that it is illustrated, the way that these characters move around this pain was really difficult to read. I couldn't stop reading, and I remember closing the book and just like staring at a wall and needing to decompress, just bawled. Like I just cried, because to be on that journey with Peter in particular, from like the first page to the last, and to see everything that he is attempting to navigate, which is a very honest exploration, a very, I think, relatable for a lot of people exploration, and just at our core we're aiming or striving to be good people, and how difficult that can often be. I really loved Intermezzo. I think it's like her best novel. It's so different from all of her other novels. For me, I think that there are 2 camps of Rooney novels. There is the character study book, so that's Normal People and Conversation with Friends, and then she has her more, I have a whole bunch of questions and I'm going to use my characters to interrogate those questions, which are Beautiful World, Where Are You? And Intermezzo. So those are her books about ideas. And it's interesting because Conversation with Friends and Intermezzo thematically are exploring, I think, a lot of the same things. I think the explorations in Intermezzo are a bit more mature, but at their core they had a lot of similarities. And so it's so fascinating, if you like enjoy reading through a writer's catalog to see their growth. It's so fascinating to see her debut novel and then her take those same ideas that she was sort of skirting around in her debut, explored in the way that they're explored in Intermezzo. Is really cool. So that was Intermezzo. I also read Conversations with Friends. We have this couple, Melissa and I can't remember the guy's name. We have this couple, and then we have these 2 friends, Francis and Bobby. This young college student starts sleeping with Melissa's husband. They're in an affair. It's an age gap affair. We're seeing the psychology with all of these characters, why they're drawn to certain things, and then we're seeing explorations of monogamy. We're seeing explorations of age gap relationships. We're seeing explorations of capitalism always, and so that's sort of like Conversation with Friends. It is, I think, her weakest book, but it's also her debut, so that's allowed. And then I read Normal People, and this is a coming of age story that centers Marianne and Connell. They meet when they are at school. They go to college, not together, but kind of together, and we just watch them in this relationship. They love each other, but their coming together is always very complicated. So we're watching them come of age alongside each other. I think if you're looking for a coming of age novel about like younger people, Normal People is like a great place to go for her. But I feel like what she's doing, like what she did in Intermezzo, and I'm so excited to see whatever she comes out with next. I definitely feel like Beautiful World, Where Are You, which was her previous novel, was like a nice jumping off point to see what she will be exploring in the future. Intermezzo was such a nice graduation from that. I am very in awe of that woman. I love her, and I'm so excited to, like, I'm really thrilled at how young all of these writers are and I'm so excited that it seems like they're continuing to give us this art. Carla Cornejo Villavicencio came out with the book Catalina. I spoke about it a couple blogs back. The book event, or the release event for this book, happened sometime in the summer, so we went over to Books Are Magic to watch her in conversation with Gia Tolentino. I love the boat.
Every time I see a boat, I'm like, that's an incredible stripper name, like Victory Time.
These two ladies are so smart. I had like my notes app open because I was trying to jot notes down because they were dropping like brain bombs. Like I was just like, well, I need you guys to pause. Like sometimes Gia would say things and she talks kind of like fast. She would say it and then it would float in the air and all of a sudden like it would backhand you and you're like, oh my god, like she just dropped the most profound thing. I might watch the conversation at a later date because they're smart, y'all. They're smart little cookies. A lot of the things that Carla was talking about was the expectation in being a writer from Latin America, the pressures to conform to like the single story that is told. She said like, I am extremely bored by cliches. I don't want to subscribe to them or ascribe to them, which I thought was really cool. We were having a nice conversation about that. She was also talking about her desire to, because she had access to this really prestigious and elusive thing, she wanted to desecrate it. And she was talking about like her access to Harvard, which I thought was also like, ugh, I love her. Some of the other things that Miss Carla said. She described herself as a child with an obsession with blasphemy. It was a ground I could dilute. She talks about the idea of withholding and how interesting that was to her. And she says that conforming to the script is embarrassing, which at the end, I don't know if someone asked her, it just came up, but people were like, who are your favorite writers? And she said, asking for my favorite writers is intellectual espionage. It's too personal. Then you know what I'm doing at 2 o'clock in the morning, which I thought was really nice. But she did mention Jamaica Kincaid and Gabriel Garcia Marquez. So that was a really fascinating conversation. If it's available on YouTube or like on an Instagram live, I'm definitely gonna link it down below because that was an insanely good conversation. I saw a movie on a flight. I was between All of Us Strangers and Wicked Letters. Started All of Us Strangers and I'm like, this is too heavy for me right now. So I didn't watch that. I watched Wicked Letters instead, which is about this woman. She moves to England from Ireland with her daughter. And she moves next door to like this very tightly wound woman and her father. All of a sudden there are these letters that are being circulated to people around town, dissing them, telling them off, a roast if you will. They get more and more obscene and everyone is starting to blame poor Irish single mother, and she's like, I would not write a letter, I would tell you to your face. She gets arrested for being scandalous or something, and the letters continue to be sent to people. It's all about like trying to find who it is that's actually writing these letters. But what a fun movie. I have never wanted to cheer so badly for the last like 30 seconds of a movie. This is a movie about female rage, and obviously we love female rage around here. It was really fun, light, and funny, and then the ending was perfection. I didn't really read any essays. I do have like a vendetta. I feel like this month I have found so many essays and they've all been behind a paywall. Who do I have to fight? I signed up for the Atlantic and they're like, you have to pay, and I was like, no. Then I signed up for the Cut and they're like, you have to pay, and I was like, no. I don't know. I'm hoping that my library has some workaround, but there are a couple of essays on the Atlantic and on the Cut. As soon as I find a way to read them, I will, I guess, share them here, but for now, we did do podcasts. So I also listened to this really interesting, I feel like this podcast has had such interesting episodes. It was called How to Be Immortal Online, and it was talking about your immortality online. And also there was this question about how like if someone has passed, how ethical it is or how moral it is to use their image in perpetuity even after they've passed, so you're not allowing someone to mourn the loss of them, which I thought was trippy. I'm pretty sure it's an Atlantic podcast. Yeah. How to Know What's Real. I was just talking about the landscape of digital spaces and how we exist in perpetuity and all of those. And it was also talking, oh my gosh, it was talking about how the cloud is just not a cloud. It like occupies physical space, the carbon footprint of the cloud, and holding on to all of these presences in their long iterations. It was really fascinating. So I also like that because that was a fun time to listen to. That is it. Those are the things that have been read and listened to and watched. I really want to know what you guys have been reading, so let me know and we'll see each other soon.